Rugby with Huw Griffin.
Welcome to HG Rugby, Huw Griffin and Rugby, my friend in England. That brings a bit of a different point of view to our South African myopic rugby views down here at the dark end of Africa. You, number one, I want to ask you, you're wearing a different rugby jersey or rugby apparel every week. And this week I see it's Moana Pacifica. What's that about?
Moana Pacifica, indeed. So I'm a rugby jersey magpie. I watch all the leagues and I think, oh, I'd really like that. The one that I really want at the moment is the New South Wales Waratahs jersey, but you can't get it shipped to Great Britain where I live. So unfortunately, that's the end of that. But a few seasons ago, I took a notice of this hoodie. It's not strictly a jersey, it's a hoodie. And I went to buy it and it was out of stock on the Moana Pacifica website. And I recommend that anybody goes on the Moana Pacifica website. All their stuff is done by Dynasty or Dynasty, however you want to pronounce it. And it's fantastic. I think they've got some of the nicest stash out there. And I went to buy this, but it was out of stock. So I happened to be messaging a friend, my friend Leslie, and I said to her, oh, I really want this, but I can't find it. And she searched on the internet and found this on some backdoor website that no one's ever heard of. There's one left on the whole internet. So I went and I purchased it. And the thing about doing that is you don't get a choice on your size. So I'm a medium in normal life, but this hoodie is a XL, which is
Oh,
why the sleeves are rolled up
uh,
there.
I was about to say
So
it fits you well, but okay, I didn't see the sleeves there. Yeah.
yeah, and it looks quite baggy. If I was to stand up, it looks a little bit silly, but it's beautiful. I love it. It's not the warmest hoodie in the world. I guess it's a hoodie designed for wearing in Samoa and Tonga rather than in Great Britain. But it's fun, especially because Moana Pacifica being obscure and niche enough that if anyone says, "Hey, is that a Moana Pacifica hoodie?" You know you've made a friend there because only rugby nerds would be able to spot such a thing in Britain anyway.
Well, I'll keep you updated on your Blue Bulls shirt on the way to to England. The latest development in that saga, but it's taking some time, but it'll get there,
This
and
could it
I'm
could be
looking
a
forward to
weekly
it.
bit. It could just be a weekly bit,
Yeah,
and we can
where's
maybe
your
have
jersey this week?
maybe the jersey
Unfortunately,
can write us a letter to tell us what it's been up to in the last seven
all I
days.
can tell you, your jersey at the moment is in Onrus in the Western Cape, which is a very small town close to Hermanus. So it went from Pretoria to Cape Town to Onrus, and now it's going to go from Onrus back to Cape Town, and then it's going to go to London, and then it's going to have to find your way somehow to you, to wherever you live. So at the moment, it's still residing in Onrus, but at least it's there now. It's ready to come with the guys that's flying it over for you. So we'll see. Hopefully, it gets there before the end of the year. If we're lucky, see how that works out.
Fingers crossed.
I can make plans, man. Ask Harry. Harry's at Munster this week, and he's going to attend the press conferences. He's going to meet up with Jake. Lots to talk about, lots to look forward to. Make sure you don't miss it. So we spoke about this a bit earlier, and we saw today the news of Ricky Ioane now signing for Leinster, and Irish rugby changing the model where the provinces have to contribute more to the national salary of the players, and lots of teams overseas being in financial trouble, including some of the French teams, surprisingly so. And you've got a bit of a bee in your bonnet about salary caps. Talk to me about that. I want to hear what you're thinking.
Yes, so I wanted to talk about salary caps as a topic. As you said, the signing of Rico Ioane, coupled with the blockbuster performance of Geordie Barrett for Leinster at the weekend against Glasgow, has set tongues are wagging about how it isn't fair, about how it's not a level playing field, and this is something that's been going on for time immemorial, basically. So I wanted to talk a bit about that and establish the facts, and then have a conversation about the rights and wrongs of it. So. There are salary caps in rugby. There are plenty of salary caps in rugby. In fact, there are more salary caps than not in rugby. And I'm going to run down a few now to give you the lay of the land, if you like. So in England, England has a salary cap nominally of £6.4 million. Now that's a little bit less than perhaps it used to be. They went through the COVID. It did drop down to 5 point something at some point, maybe five exactly. And now it's on to 6.4. But and there's a but. And this is where salary caps get interesting because it's never black and white with salary caps. So England has a salary cap of 6.4. However, there are exceptions and credits that they can earn through things like academies and stuff like that. Hello.
6.4, what's the currency?
6.4 GBP,
British pounds.
British pounds.
We don't know what GBP is. We live in South Africa.
Okay. 6.4 Great British Pounds.
There we go.
So 6.4 nominally, but then there's exceptions and credits they can earn on things like academy contracts and stuff like that, which then brings that price, that salary cap, up an extra 1.4 million to 7.8 million is the most that it can spend. And it says that directly on the Premiership's website. It says that 7.8 million is the most a club can spend, except they are also allowed a marquee player on top of that, which is exempt from the salary cap. So the most obvious example of that would be Finn Russell at Bath has a rumoured salary of close to £1 million. Now, how true that is or not, I'm not sure, but that's the rumour. So Charlie Morgan, the foremost writer of English rugby, speculated that the amount that Bath were spending on player salaries was the best part of 9 million. And that's off what is supposedly a base level of 6.4. And we have the top team spending the best part of 9 million. So that's the grey area that we have around salary caps. If we then move to France, in France, the salary cap is a base level of 10.7 million euros. However, there are exemptions to that. So in France, there are no marquee players. Well, obviously there are marquee players in terms of he's a marquee player, but there's no marquee player clause in those salary caps. But there are other clauses and exemptions, whether that's regarding, again, academies or what have you, or players that you provide to the French national squad. And how it works is you don't get necessarily payments for international players, but you get allowances on top of the salary cap for how many you provide to the national squad. And then you get medical jokers as well. Whereas if a player gets injured, you can sign someone to replace them, and that's allowed within the salary cap. So the salary cap in France, like I said, is 10.7. But within the credits and the extra money that you're allowed to spend through the various loopholes, someone like Toulouse is actually spending 13.4 million euros on player salaries. So that's, again, an example. Base level 10.7, which not everyone is spending to. Again, in England as well, not everyone is spending to the cap, but the top teams are actually spending considerably over it. And that's just on player salaries. We'll come to overall budgets a bit later. And then if you go into the URC, everyone says there's no salary cap in the URC. There's no overall URC salary cap, but there are salary caps within the URC. So the Welsh regions have a salary cap currently, now today, of 4.5 million Great British pounds, plus 2 marquee players, which are not captured within that salary cap. Now, a lot of people get it twisted and think that that 4.5 million is the funding that the WRU gives to the Welsh regions. That's not correct. The funding that the WRU provides is greater than that. But the salary cap that is agreed between the Welsh regions and the WRU is 4.5 million pounds plus 2 marquee players. And then the South African cap is 85 million rand, plus whatever extra payments come from the unions, which is, shall we say, not the most transparent thing in the world, and we don't quite know what it is. Now, we'll talk about the South African salary cap maybe a bit more in a bit, because how are you affording that Sharks squad for that money is a question. We'll come to that. That's a bigger conversation. And then in Ireland, so Ireland is the big example at the moment with Leinster, the unlimited budget that everyone's talking about. So the IRFU are saying that they've got aspirations of having funding for each of the 4 provinces of 10 million euros. Now, whether that's a salary cap or just the centralised funding that goes to them, I'm not quite sure. But what you also have in Ireland is you have central contracts, where the top players who play for the Irish national team are centrally contracted by the union. And now, up until today, that has been 70% of that player's wages is paid by the union, 30% paid by the club. That's now changing to 40% by the club and 60% by the union. So that's why someone like Leinster has so much extra wiggle room, because so many of their players, I think all but 4 of the centrally contracted players in Ireland are at Leinster, meaning that 70% of all those salaries of their very best players are not paid by Leinster. That's why they have all this extra money. One of the reasons why they have all this extra money. So if I just run that down quickly, if you look, I've converted everything into euros to make it apples for apples as best we can. So France is 10.7 million euros plus extra credits, which are theoretically unlimited. In Ireland, we can take that 10 million euro figure whether we want to or not. I'm sure someone in the comments will tell me whether I'm right or wrong. Plus essential contracts. In England, in euros, the maximum a team can spend is 9.1 million. And actually, when you read it out like that, where it's 10.7 million in France and 9.1 million in England, plus a marquee player, all of a sudden that doesn't sound like such a big difference, does it? All of a sudden. And then you've got Wales in euros is 5.2 plus two marquee players. And then in South Africa in euros, it works out to 4 million. So there's a big discrepancy between those top three and then those two. There's no salary cap as far as I can see in Scotland, and there's none in Italy. But the difference between Scotland and Italy and the rest is that Scotland and Italy have only got two clubs. So they are always going to have a portion of their players come from overseas because they don't have the space in their squads to accommodate all those players. So it's a different paradigm for those guys. But that's just kind of the facts as I've been able to establish them around salary caps. Super Rugby, as far as I can tell, has no salary cap, and the Japanese league has no salary cap. And we'll talk a bit more about how the Japanese league manages it in a bit. But that's how I just wanted to lay out the facts before we start going deep diving the rights and the wrongs of salary caps in club rugby here in 2025.
Well, what was interesting to me is the Premiership has got a salary cap. The top 14 has a salary cap. Those are the championships. The URC as a championship does not have a salary cap, which inevitably means it's not a level playing field. Look at Ireland compared to South Africa. You've got a 10 million euro versus a 4 million euro. That's immediately, glaringly obvious. That is not the same thing. And I suppose South Africa, up to this stage, have not been shareholders in the URC or the Champions Cup or European Cups. So they've had to pay to participate, traveling costs and everything else. And inevitably, because our salary cap is smaller, but it's not imposed by the URC, it's imposed by the economic realities of playing rugby or being a rugby union in South Africa, you're at a disadvantage. You've got a smaller squad. You've got probably not as big as a talent pool as the overseas guys do. Like you said, England and France and those places allow overseas players to come play there, earning big salaries. South Africa can't compete with that. So basically, every single player in South Africa, I think the only one that I can think of that's not South African is Ben Loader, who plays for the Stormers. It's a very big difference. South Africa is very, very much on the back foot here. And you asked me in terms of what do the SA Rugby, what do they contribute to the unions? Roughly on top of the 85, they get around, apparently, and this is not confirmed from what I know, from what I've heard, it gets up to about 130 to 140 million rand, which roughly divides by 20 is about 7 million euros. And they also have marquee players allowed, but we're not sure who they are and how they're paid. But let's just talk about the almost unfairness of not having a championship salary cap and the effect it has on the different teams competing in that.
In the URC. So there's two sides to this for me. Side number one is this. The URC is made up of technically 6 different countries with 3 different currencies. You've got Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, Italy, and South Africa. You've got the rand, you've got the pound, and you've got the euro. So how you can establish a salary cap across all those with the different costs of living and the different exchange rates, to me, is impossible. Even in Ireland, it's a nightmare on its own. And without wishing to, for any Irish watchers, without wishing to get into the what's the word I need to be careful of using here? Without wishing to get into the politics of Ireland, having Ulster presumably pay their players in Great British pounds and the other 3 pay their players in euros, how do you have an equality across the salary caps there? And then how on earth can you tell a team based in Dublin and a team based in Johannesburg that they have the same amount of money to spend? Because either the team in Dublin is going to say that's impossible, or the team in Johannesburg is going to go, that's amazing, I can literally have whatever players that I want. You can't have the same amount of money for both. So therefore, having a cap, how does that work? And then you'd have to renegotiate every time a political leader came into power and tanked the economy of one of those nations. And then the other side of it is this, and this is something that I never hear anybody talking about. Are the URC nations competing for the same players? Now, let me just explain that. When was the last time an Irish province signed a Welsh international? Has it ever happened? Can anyone think of an example? The last Welsh player to be signed by a South African franchise was Jamie Roberts, and he was not a Welsh international by that point. And I believe they signed him from Bath, not from a Welsh region. When was the last time a Scottish team signed a Welsh international? When was the last time a Welsh team signed a Scottish international? We all know that you never get players out of Ireland until they're at the end of their career. How many Italian internationals are playing for Scotland, are playing in Scotland, playing in Wales, playing in Ireland? That we're not taking players off each other. When we're talking about competing, we're talking about international players. And when we're talking about international players, by and large, with the exception of the odd Aussie and the odd Argentinian, particularly in Italy, we're talking about Kiwis and we're talking about Saffers. We're talking about these teams signing South African players and we're talking about teams signing New Zealanders from Super Rugby. Now, New Zealand's got their own way of working that in that they don't pick players for the national team who play outside New Zealand. But we won't talk about New Zealand too much in this. South Africa. So there's a lot of South African players playing all over the world. What drives that? Now, there's only 4 elite level teams. Now, I know there's lots of rugby clubs in South Africa, as there are lots of rugby clubs in every country in the world, but there's 4 top level franchises for a population of the best part of 60 million. So if you talk about the funnel of players, South Africa's funnel is the tightest. You've got, if you like, the least chance of making it in South Africa, which is why you'll openly hear South Africans talk about players who don't make it at one of the franchises go abroad to play. That's the phrasing that they use. But where are they actually going? In the past, they would have gone to France or to England. Now, England isn't as major of a player on the rugby transfer market as it used to be. If we talk about current Springboks who currently play in England, how many are there? Andre Pollard, Thomas du Toit, and then I'm struggling to think of a couple. You've already brought Andre Hesthuizen back. Andre Pollard is coming back this season. Jasper Wiese left England. He's not come back to South Africa, but he's left England last season. And we're seeing South Africa bringing players back more and more. The economic situation at the clubs is improving. I'm not going to sit here and say it's amazing, but it's improving. And from this summer, you will be stakeholders in the URC, in the Champions Cup, and therefore receiving money from them. So we have already seen the tide turn of players going to Europe and now coming back to South Africa. Not 100%, but a lot of the top players are returning. In fact, I'm not sure there are any current Springboks playing in the French league. I'm not sure there are any. The place that South Africa is losing players to is Japan. That's where the majority of the top level Springboks who don't play in South Africa are playing is in Japan. And Japan has a completely different way of working. So Japan doesn't have a salary cap. What Japan has is categories of player. You've got category A players who are Japanese. You've got category B players who are not Japanese, but are not capped for another nation, therefore could qualify on residency to play for Japan. And then you've got category C, who are players who are capped for other nations. That's the likes of your Bowden Barrett, your Peter Steph du Toit, Curtly Aaron, Sir Cheslin Colby, these guys. But there's a limit of how many of those players they can have. They can only have 3 of those per club, of those category C players. So that's a different way of limiting it. And I wonder, maybe is there something we can learn from that? If we look at Leinster as an example now, they've got Slimani, they've got RG Snyman, they've got Geordie Barrett, and they're replacing Geordie Barrett with Rico Ioane. There's your 3 category Cs. So that's quite similar when you think about it to the Japan model. So that's kind of the side of it when we talk about a salary cap in the URC. How would that ever work with the different economies and the different currencies? And B, are URC nations, with the exception of South Africa, really competing for the same players? Are they really? Because I don't see Irish provinces sniffing around Wales looking to sign Jack Morgan, looking to sign Dewi Lake. Now, not people won't like me saying that, but that's how I see it.
No, that's quite an interesting thing. The difference also is that in the Premiership and top 14, there's a central one body. the money comes from that body, but not in the URC. The URC is not the controlling body. It doesn't fund any of these nations. The nations themselves fund it. So you can say to Joe the Lions that you can have the same budget as Leinster, for argument's sake, but it'll never happen because there isn't the money in South Africa to match that budget. So it's sort of a academic exercise, almost a theoretical exercise. So the point I'm getting at, you mentioned that South Africa is now going to become stakeholders. What would it mean to South African pockets? Let's call it that. How much money are we going to be earning, or how much less money are we going to be spending to be able to compete in Europe in terms of flying and accommodation and everything else, and sharing in the prize money? How much of a difference do you think that will make?
I've seen it in an article somewhere where the South Africa Rugby Union talked about how much money it was costing them to play in the URC. I can't remember off the top of my head. I want to say it was something like 300 million rand or something like that. I'll need to be fact checked on that. I could Google it now. I don't quite have the time, but it's a lot. So if you assume if you assume that they can cover their own costs, then there's a massive saving there already. And how much money that you'll earn from the URC, this is a very hot topic. No one really knows, because if you look at some reports, they will tell you that the TV deal for the URC is higher than it is for the English Premiership. However, the monies that the teams are receiving in the URC is lower, all told. And it's a little bit, the money gets paid to the participating unions, and then the unions disseminate that money to the clubs. It's not that transparent. Some people will tell you that it is, but the money that we're told that the URC makes in revenue and the money that the clubs say that they are paid doesn't work out. And then you've got CVC in there as well. CVC own, I want to say 27, 28% of the URC. So they take a huge chunk of it. So for me to turn around now and tell you how much extra money you're going to earn, I can't tell you that. However, you'll be spending less. The net
that's the
will go
point.
down.
Yeah, we'll be spending less. Yeah, it's going to make it. Clearly, it must be worth a while. Otherwise, we would be in it. I'm just wondering whether that will translate into bigger squads, because I think that the salary cap is one side of it. The other side of the number of players you're allowed to have in South Africa, 56 players in one of these four big provinces. To play with 56 players across a tournament that lasts 9 months, plus you play in the Champions Cup, or the Challenge Cup for that matter, with 56 players, that's an almost impossible task, don't you think?
Well, here in Wales, we're making do with less than that, a lot less than that. I think the Scarlets have used 39 players so far this season. Now, the Scarlets, I think, are an extreme case, but we're having to make it work. But I guess my question is, and this is going to sound like a very stupid question to a South African who I'm sure will know the answer. When you've only got 4 top franchises, sure, you can have as many players as you want with the player pool that you've got that's massive.
No, but you can't afford them. That's the problem. I can have 1,000 rugby players, but I can't pay 1,000 rugby players. There's a salary cap and a squad size. You've got 85 million rand, and you have to fit 56 players in there. Or I suppose if you can fit 200 players into the 85 million, but I'm sure there's some sort of an arrangement that must be 56. I'm not sure that I don't know. I do know that Jake White is very unhappy about it. He's mentioned often that the gap between his player number 30, if you take it, ranking them from 1 to 56, the gap between 30 and 56 is huge. And we've seen that. Last year the team that went to play against Northampton Saints was clearly a C team, if you want to call it that. And they had to play in a Champions Cup knockout round, clearly, and they were shown up as you would expect them to be. So it's not just also a matter of not having the right players. Jake always goes on about bringing the big players back to South Africa, and then you'll force the current players down a level, which means your talent pool will be bigger. So you wouldn't have that gap. So your players from 1 to 56 will be almost more equal when the bottom part of it is being forced down to a lower league, and you bring in the better players in. The problem is you'll never get those players to come back because, number one, they earn less money here. For example, in Japan, they play less rugby. It's a shorter season. It's not as physical. They earn more money. There's lots of rumors now about Kurtley Arendse not coming back to South Africa after his sabbatical in Japan. And we've heard from the Bulls, from Willem Strauss, he said it's not happening. He's definitely coming back just as a matter of interest. How are you going to get those guys to come back? What Harry was been proposing is we must get to a point where we can attract overseas players, like you just said. Imagine Geordie Barrett not going to go play for Leinster, but he comes and plays for the Bulls or for the Stormers, for argument's sake, for 6 months. if we can get to that, if that's even a remotely possibility, what do you think of that?
I think it would be very exciting. I certainly, as a fan, it's something that I'd love to watch. I think that moving from the UK to South Africa is maybe a bigger jump than moving from the UK to France, for example. It might be a bit of a culture shock. And you'd almost have to pay them UK wages, though. There's laws in the UK that say if you have a company that has a headquarters in the UK and a company that has a headquarters in India, if you bring someone over from India to the UK, you have to give them a salary that means they can maintain their lifestyle. So, because obviously, if you paid them what they were being paid in India, they wouldn't be able to manage in the UK on that money. So you have to give them the extra. And I wonder whether because these South Africans who are going abroad to Japan or something, are making the cash that they will then bring back to South Africa, presumably at some point and live there like that. So if you bring someone from the UK down to South Africa and you pay them what is a very good wage in South Africa, what's that money going to do for them when they go back to the UK? Perhaps not a lot. I guess my other question is, the Sharks have managed to do it. The Sharks have managed to have a squad of nearly entirely
I've got something to
Springbok.
say about that. I know how that works. How it works, and there's a couple of South African big marquee players in South Africa, big players, earning mega bucks, and they do not get paid by the union, or they don't get paid by the union, only the union. So that, for argument's sake, and I'm not sure the percentage, this is just spitballing, but let's say they earn 20% of whatever the total salary is from the union. But they're also earning a salary from another company, a supporter, a sponsor, whatever. So they're an employee of that company who then pays them a wage or a salary. So that part of the salary does not get counted towards the salary cap. How do you think they can afford Andre Pollard earning 15 million rand over a year on an 85 million rand budget at the Bulls? It's clearly not being paid by the union. I mean, it's quite obvious. If you have to get a player that earns 15 million, who are you going to let go to make way for him? I mean, that's something that they have to weigh up, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't like to say I don't know have all of the details, but yes, clearly there is something else going on.
Yeah, how can you afford Eben Etzebeth, Siya Kolisi, Oxenchair, Bongi Mbonambi, you name it, those superstar Springboks at the Sharks? They're clearly not being paid by the Sharks themselves. Yeah, I don't know. I'm interested to see how this pans out once we are stakeholders in the URC, like you said. And I think, honestly, I've heard it before and I've said it before. Jake said to me in person that the Bulls are going to push for the Champions Cup from about 2027. And that obviously means after they've now become stakeholders and they've been able to build up the squad and he's got the players that he wants to be in his squad, getting Andre Pollard in. Sort of his dream come true. He's always said at one press conference after the other, we have to bring Andre Pollard back. We have to bring RG Snyman back. He's brought Andre Pollard back. He tried his best to get RG, but RG has now decided that Leinster is more attractive. The point is they are coming back, and they're coming back for family, not necessarily for money. That's quite an interesting observation. They're coming back because there's a support structure here. His wife is not alone with the baby and whatever else it might be. That part of the equation doesn't get enough attention. You need to be. They're craving that support structure. They don't have it overseas because they're alone. Coming back here, Akke van der Merwe was one person who specifically said he came back here to be closer to family, so his children can grow up with their grandparents and the like. So that's something to consider as well.
Absolutely. I'd like to just mention as well the difference between budgets and salary caps, because specifically in France. So this is the kind of big news that has been coming out in the last week is that LNR, and to be fair to the French, this is quite good. LNR, who's the company that runs the Top 14 and the Pro Day 2, they publish a big PDF that's despite being in French, is very accessible to where it breaks down the finances of the clubs. Now, it doesn't name and shame clubs. It does in some instances name which clubs are which, but in not all. So it doesn't say that Toulon are making a 17 million euro loss. It won't say that. It will say that someone is making a 17 million loss, but we're not saying who it is. But it is probably as transparent as you will see anything in pro sport. And the difference between the salaries and the budgets. So the big headline, the one who has the biggest budget is Toulouse. They have a 62.5 million euro budget. That's what they spent. Budget is a bit of a misleading word. It's more accurate to say that's what they did spend, Because, for example, Lyon had a 55.8 million euro budget, but that's because they spent that amount of money because they were renovating their stadium, building extra facilities and things. It was capital expenditure and infrastructure. So it's not budget, that's just what they spent. So the amount that Toulouse spent on rugby was 62.5 million euros. Now, as I've already said, only 13.4 million of that was player salaries, so 21% of it. On top of that, they had an extra 7 million euros was spent on other salaries, so we assume coaches and things. So that's 20 million euros they're spending on people's salaries, which means that there's an extra 40 million euros that Toulouse are spending other, on something else. Now, that's probably facilities, that's academies, that's the women's team, that's developing coaches, you name it. Like someone told me a story about how Toulouse's under 15s turned up for a game. They had a big branded coach. They turned up. Everyone had pressed ironed kits. Even the kit man looked $1 million and things. If there's something that can have money spent on it, Toulouse is spending money on it. That's kind of what you can't necessarily control with a salary cap. That's where those who have the extra money will always be able to find those percentages where if you limited what Leinster could spend on their squad, if they've still got extra money on top of that, they will still spend that money in some way, and they will make it count because these are very intelligent, high performance people with money. They will find a way to make that money count.
Yeah, and a very interesting video the other day about how Toulouse find a way or found a way. They made a player a signing, they made him pay his own transfer fee, and they were supposed to refund him, and they never did. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so that's the story with Melvyn Jaminet. I'll just recount it briefly. Is that Jaminet broke through playing for Perpignan in the Pro D2. He won Pro D2 Player of the Year. Toulouse said, "You're good, we'll sign you." But because of the salary cap, they couldn't afford the buyout clause of his Perpignan contract, which was €500,000, 450,000 euros. So they said to Jaminet, "You pay your own release clause, and then we'll get you the money. We'll catch you back. Don't worry about it." And he said, "Okay." And he took out bank loans to pay for his move to Toulouse. And move to Toulouse he did. And then he was there for a while, and then it didn't work out. He didn't get the game time, and he left Toulouse and moved to Toulon. So this move to Toulouse was back in 2022. So it's 3 years ago. He moved to Toulon, and then he played at Toulon for a bit. It was going all right. And then he had that incident in Argentina where he made a video of himself making racist remarks that earned him a ban from rugby and had his wages docked. Now, the tricky thing about that was, since he's had his wages docked and he's not playing for Toulouse anymore, he can't afford to pay back his bank loans, which he took out to fund his move to Toulouse. So eventually, it starts leaking out what's happened. The interesting part of it is that it appears that Toulouse tried to pay Jaminet back his transfer fee secretly, i.e. in contravening the salary cap, whereby the story is that they paid money to a company in Tahiti, and then that company in Tahiti ended, and that money was supposed to go to Jaminet. However, twist in the tail, it never did. Jaminet never received the money. So 450,000 euros of Toulouse's money disappeared. Jaminet still highly in debt, and Toulouse slapped with, so far, a 1.3 million euro fine from LNR, and are still under investigation by, I can't remember the name of the organization, but the French sporting police.
Sure. Yeah, there are ways and means, like we said. I wonder what happened in Tahiti. That's an interesting story.
It's happened before. Toulon got a fine for the Ches and Colby transfer from Toulouse to Toulon. Montpellier got a huge fine for salary cap issues and things. So it's not unusual, as Tom Jones says.
Welsh, suitably Welsh, no? Don't you think? All right, thanks, Huw. That's like I wanted to talk to you about Munster a little bit, but I'll leave that for another day. We'll talk about it next week. what happened next week. Of course, the Bulls this week play Munster, and next week they play Glasgow. Two big, very big games. And some of the South African teams, Stormers play against Connacht, whose coach resigned today, apparently. And then the Lions play Benetton, and Sharks play Edinburgh. Yeah, so I'm interested to hear about that. Just as an aside, what did you think of the quarterfinals? How did it pan out for you?
I really liked Toulon versus Toulouse. I thought that was a proper game. I'm a bit annoyed that we get these duplication of league fixtures. Toulon and Toulouse are due to play each other on the 9th of May. So in the space of, I think I worked out 7 weeks, Toulouse are playing Bordeaux and Toulon twice, which is a bit crap, a bit boring, because it takes away the occasion of the game, you know. But I enjoyed that as a game. I thought it was very brutal, physical. It was proper rugby, knocking 10 bells out of each other and kicking for poles. That's proper rugby. I don't want any of these 70-point try fests. That's all salad. I want this kind of rugby. Look, Leinster against Glasgow, it was phenomenal to see. I tweeted at the time, I've never seen Toulouse play like how Leinster played in that game. Geordie Barrett, unplayable, one of the best performances I've ever seen a player put in. And then I didn't catch much of Saints versus Castres, sorry. Yeah, I don't think UBB are the finished team. I don't think they're going to win anything. I think they're a bit too soft, which is hard for me to say because I love them so much. They're probably my favourite French team.
And talking about your favourite South African team, the Bulls losing against Edinburgh.
Yeah, I didn't see much of that. You just the start got away from you, and you're always chasing the game, and that doesn't really suit Bulls rugby. I think to be chasing the game. I still think the scrum is a sight to behold. Once you actually realise how good it is and you watch it, there's almost like a second set with the Bulls scrum. They engage, and the ball goes in, and then they drop, and then push. It's just beautiful to watch, but. Yeah, disappointing. Like I said, if you wanted to be a champion team, you needed to beat the Edinburgh, and you didn't beat them. So,
yeah,
disappointing.
Yeah, somebody was very upset of you being snarky about what did the Bulls win? You know, how many finals they played, and you said how many did they win? It's like I said,
what do you want me to say?
I agree. That's true. I can't say anything about. It's the absolute truth. All right, man. Thanks, you. I appreciate it. It was good. Talk again soon. Thank you, man.
Rugby with Huw Griffin.